My name is Carla Bennett. I'm 31 years old. Last Thursday night, I sat alone in my apartment in Spokane, Washington, listening to voicemail number 43 from my family. I hadn't spoken to any of them in 7 years. Not one message started with "I'm sorry." Not one asked if I was okay. Every single one said the same 2 words: "Call me." I let the phone sit on the table while the next message played, the screen lighting up the room in short flashes. Outside, rain tapped against the window, steady and quiet, the kind of sound that usually makes the apartment feel calm. That night it didn't. 7 years earlier, I had walked out of my mother's house with one suitcase, $200, and a small wooden box my grandmother left me. My family told everyone back home that I wasn't stable, that I needed help, that they were worried about me. They weren't worried. They were relieved. And they would have stayed relieved if my sister hadn't searched my name online last week. Before I tell you what those 2 words really meant, I need to go back to the night everything fell apart. It was Thanksgiving 2018 in Millbrook, Ohio, the kind of town where people don't need social media to know your business. Dinner at my parents' house always followed the same routine. My mother's china on the long table. Too many chairs squeezed into a room built for half that number. My father pouring wine like silence could be filled if he kept everyone's glass full. I was 24 then, working 2 jobs. Waitressing evenings at a place called Luca's Grill, answering phones during the day at a real estate office downtown. Saving money a little at a time because I wanted to go back to school. My sister Danielle had just gotten a promotion at her company. Same pay, better title, and my mother talked about it like she'd won an award. She stood at the end of the table, glass raised. To Danielle, she said, smiling wide, "Our success story. Always making this family proud." Everyone lifted their glasses. I lifted mine too. Nobody asked what I was doing. Nobody asked about my classes, or my savings, or the fact that I'd been working every weekend for almost 2 years. At that table, I was background noise. But I hadn't come to dinner to argue. I had one question, and I kept waiting for the right moment to ask it. After dessert, when the plates were half empty and the conversation had settled into that low-hum relatives make when they start repeating the same stories, I finally spoke. "Mom," I said, "do you remember the education fund Grandma set up for me?" The room went quiet in a way that didn't feel natural. Not the comfortable kind of quiet. The kind that makes you realize everyone else already knows something you don't. My mother set her coffee cup down slowly. She looked at me. Then she looked around the table at everyone else before she answered. Her voice was soft, almost sweet. "This again," she said. "She's been like this for months." I didn't respond right away. I just sat there with my fork in my hand, feeling 15 pairs of eyes land on me at once. My aunt reached across the table and touched my wrist. "Honey," she said quietly, "your mom's just trying to help you." Help me. That word again. I stood up without saying anything and carried my plate into the kitchen. At every family dinner, I ended up doing dishes. Nobody told me to. I just did it. Habit. The faucet was running, but the voices in the dining room carried through the doorway. My mother's voice dropped lower. "She doesn't need that money," she said. "It went to Danielle's tuition and the car. Carla's not going anywhere anyway." I turned the water off. My grandmother had told me about that fund herself. $12,000. One account for each of us. Money, she said, was only for my future. I dried my hands, walked back into the dining room, and stood by the table. "That money was mine," I said. "Grandma left it for me." My mother didn't raise her voice. She never did when other people were watching. "You're being dramatic," she said. "You always make everything about money." "I'm asking about something she left in my name. And I'm telling you," she said, tilting her head the way she always did when she wanted the room on her side, "you sound just like your grandmother. Always stirring things up." 10 minutes later, she called everyone into the living room. I knew what was coming. She stood in the middle of the room, holding a napkin like she needed it for balance. "I've tried to keep this private," she said, voice shaking just enough to sound convincing, "but I think everyone needs to know Carla hasn't been well lately." Nobody asked what she meant. Nobody asked if I was okay. My father stared at the floor. My brother leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. My sister scrolled through her phone like the whole thing had nothing to do with her. I went upstairs, packed one suitcase, took the $200 I had saved in tip money, and picked up the wooden box my grandmother gave me before she died. When I walked back through the living room, my mother didn't stop me. She just said one sentence, calm as ever. If you leave, don't expect to come back. I didn't slam the door. I closed it carefully. Outside, snow was falling over Millbrook, Ohio. I had one suitcase, a bus ticket I hadn't bought yet, and nowhere to go. That was the last night I heard my mother's voice. For 7 years. Until last Thursday, when my phone filled up with 43 voicemails in one night. The night I left, I didn't have a plan. I drove to the bus station on Route 40 because it was the only place open that late. The waiting room smelled like old coffee and wet coats, and the television in the corner was playing a game show with the sound turned down. I stood at the counter with my suitcase beside me and asked the man behind the glass how far $200 would get me. He tapped a few keys, looked at the screen, and said, Spokane, Washington. That's the furthest ticket I can print for that amount. I didn't think about it. I said yes. 36 hours on a bus gives you a lot of time to sit with your thoughts. Cornfields turned into flat gray highways. Flat highways turned into mountains. Mountains turned into rain that didn't seem to stop. I didn't sleep much. I kept the wooden box on my lap the whole trip like if I let go of it, I might lose the only thing that still felt like mine. The woman sitting next to me for part of the ride was going to Idaho to see her grandson. She offered me half a sandwich somewhere outside of Omaha. She didn't ask why I looked like I hadn't slept. She just handed me a napkin when my eyes started watering. Sometimes strangers know when not to ask questions. When I got to Spokane, it was early morning and cold enough that my breath showed in the air. I had never been that far from Ohio before. The streets looked wider. The buildings looked older. Everything smelled like rain and pavement. The first week I stayed at a women's shelter near downtown. The second week I found a cheap room in a hostel above a bakery that started working at 4 a.m. Every day smelled like bread and cleaning spray. I didn't have credit. Didn't have references. Didn't have anyone I could list as an emergency contact. On every form, I wrote not applicable. Within 2 weeks, I found a job answering phones at a small consulting company called Northbridge Community Services. There were 9 employees, 2 printers that never worked right, and a break room with a coffee maker older than I was. It wasn't the kind of job people dream about, but it was steady. I showed up early, stayed late, did whatever needed to be done. Sorting files, filing invoices, fixing spreadsheets nobody else wanted to touch. 3 weeks after I started, I made the mistake of checking Facebook. I hadn't looked since the night I left. There was a post in the family group my mother ran. Please keep Carla in your prayers. She's going through a difficult time, and we just hope she's safe wherever she is. Over 100 reactions. Comments from people I'd known my whole life. You're such a strong mother. Praying for her. Family is everything. My brother had commented too. She always was the dramatic one. 47 likes. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I deleted my account. No goodbye post. No message. Nothing. For the next 2 years, I didn't speak to anyone from MILLBROOK. Not one phone call. Not one holiday card. Not even a message passed through someone else. At first, the silence felt heavy. Then it started to feel quiet. The first morning I woke up in Spokane without feeling nervous, I remember lying in bed and trying to figure out what was different. It took a minute to realize what was missing. My mother's voice. Not out loud. In my head. That constant feeling that I was about to do something wrong. Without it, the room felt bigger. At work, the owner of the company, Marion Cole, noticed me before I noticed myself. One Friday afternoon, she stopped by my desk and looked at the filing cabinet behind me. You reorganized all of this, she asked. Yes. Nobody asked you to. I know. She stood there for a second, then pulled a chair over and sat down. What else do you see that needs fixing? She asked. That was the first time anyone had asked me that without sounding annoyed. While I was building a life in Spokane, my family was building a story about me back in Ohio. I didn't hear most of it until years later. My mother told people I was getting treatment somewhere out of state. She never said where. In a town like Millbrook, she didn't have to. People filled in the worst version on their own. My old apartment above the hardware store was cleaned out within a month. My sister kept most of the furniture. My father told the neighbors I just needed time. My brother posted things online about loyalty and family. Every version of the story had one thing in common. I was the problem. For 7 years, that story stayed exactly the same. No one checked. No one called. No one looked for me. 7 years of nothing. Until the day my sister needed a cosigner on a loan and decided to type my name into Google. By the time my sister searched my name, my life looked nothing like the one I left behind. It didn't happen all at once. The first year in Spokane was survival. The second year was the first time I felt like I could make a plan that belonged to me. At Northbridge, I moved from reception to project assistant in less than 6 months. Not because I asked. Because I kept noticing things nobody else wanted to notice. Budgets that didn't add up. Forms filled out wrong. Deadlines nobody had written down. One afternoon, Marion dropped a file on my desk and said, "Check this before we send it." It was a grant application for a housing project outside the city. I stayed late, went through every page twice, and found a mistake in the budget that would have cost the client almost $8,000. The next morning, she stood in my doorway holding the corrected copy. "You catch everything?" she asked. "I try to." She nodded once. "Good. I need someone who tries." After that, the work kept coming. More files. More responsibility. More hours. At night, I started taking online classes through Eastern Washington University. Business administration. One class at a time. No loans. I paid tuition from every paycheck, even if it meant eating the same thing for dinner 3 nights in a row. Rice. Pasta. Whatever was on sale. I cut my own hair for almost a year because I didn't want to spend the money. There wasn't any moment where my life suddenly became successful. It was just alarms going off early. Spreadsheets open late. Falling asleep with a textbook on my chest. By the end of my 3rd year, I finished my degree. No ceremony. No party. I printed the diploma at a copy shop and put it in a cheap frame above my desk. Marion noticed it the next morning. She stood there looking at it for a long time. "You didn't tell me you were finishing school," she said. I didn't think it mattered. She shook her head slightly. "It matters." A month later, she promoted me to project coordinator. 2 years after that, I was managing a team. Northbridge grew from 9 employees to almost 40. We started working with small towns, nonprofit groups, housing programs, anything that needed funding and paperwork done right the first time. I wasn't rich. I drove a used Honda, lived in a small 1-bedroom apartment, had a savings account for the first time in my life. That was enough. Somewhere around year 6, a regional business magazine did a short article about community development projects in the Northwest. My name ended up in it because Marion insisted I be listed as operations manager. There was a small photo, a short bio, nothing dramatic. I didn't even tell anyone about it. Back in Ohio, that article sat online for almost a year before anyone in my family saw it. The only reason they did was because my sister needed money. I didn't hear the story until later, but I know exactly how it happened. She was sitting at her kitchen table with bills spread out in front of her. Divorce papers, mortgage notices, credit card statements. She needed a cosigner for a loan, and nobody in the family had the credit to help. My mother's score was too low. My father was retired. My brother still owed student loans. So she thought of me, not because she missed me, because she remembered I used to be careful with money. She typed my name into the search bar. Carla Bennett. The first result was my LinkedIn page. Operations Director, Northbridge Community Services. The second was the magazine article. The third was the company website with my photo next to my title. She stared at the screen long enough that my aunt asked what she was looking at. "Carla," she said. My aunt thought she meant an old picture. "No," my sister said slowly. "She's working somewhere. Big job." Then she called my mother. I didn't hear the call, but I know the words because my aunt told me later. "She's fine," my sister said. "She's doing better than any of us." There was a long pause on the other end. Then my mother said one sentence. "That can't be right." For 7 years, the story in Millbrook had been simple. I was unstable. I had disappeared. I needed help. Now the story didn't fit anymore. And when stories stop fitting, people start making phone calls. The first call came the same night, then another, then another. By the time I finished a meeting at work the next afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop vibrating in my pocket. When I finally looked at it, the screen showed more missed calls than I could count at once. Ohio area codes. Numbers I hadn't seen in 7 years. I went into my office, closed the door, and sat down. Then I pressed play on the first voicemail. "Carla, it's Danielle. Call me when you get this." The second. "Honey, it's Dad. We need to talk." The third. "This is your mother. Pick up the phone." By the time I reached the last one, there were 43 messages. Different voices. Different tones. Same 2 words. "Call me." I set the phone face down on my desk and just sat there for a while, listening to the rain hit the window. I didn't call anyone back that night. Not because I didn't know what to say. Because I did. And I knew if I answered while the messages were still fresh in my head, the conversation would turn into the same thing it always used to be. Them talking. Me explaining. Nothing changing. So I put my phone on silent, set it on the kitchen counter, and made dinner. Pasta, jar sauce, the same thing I cooked when I didn't feel like thinking. While the water boiled, the screen kept lighting up. Missed call. Voicemail. Missed call again. 7 years of silence, and suddenly everyone had something urgent to say. After dinner, I sat at the table with my laptop and opened a blank document. Not an email. Just a page. When things feel messy, I write them down until they make sense. At the top of the page, I typed 3 lines. Step 1, do not answer tonight. Step 2, listen to everything first. Step 3, decide what I want, not what they want. I left the document open and picked up my phone again. 43 voicemails takes longer to listen to than you expect. The first few sounded careful. My sister trying to sound casual. My father trying to sound calm. My mother trying to sound like nothing had happened. By the 10th message, the tone changed. Less polite. More direct. We need to talk. Call me back tonight. This is important. By the 20th, the word help started showing up. My brother talking about a business idea. My sister saying she needed a cosigner. My mother saying the family was going through a difficult time. Not one message said, "We miss you." Not one said, "We were wrong." By the time I reached the last voicemail, the room felt very quiet. I set the phone down and leaned back in the chair. 7 years. 7 years of building a life from scratch. And the first time they reached out, it wasn't to see how I was. It was to see what I could do for them. I called the only person who knew the whole story. Her name is Lena Torres. She started at Northbridge about 3 years after I did. We worked late together more times than I could count, and somewhere between deadlines and takeout dinners, we told each other the things we didn't usually say out loud. She answered on the second ring. "You okay?" she asked. "My family found me," I said. There was a pause. "Which part hurts?" she asked. "The part where I'm not surprised." She didn't try to make it better. She never does. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked at the phone on the table. Nothing tonight. Good. They left 43 voicemails. Another pause. That many. Every one of them asking for something. She let that sit for a second. "You don't owe anyone a response," she said. "I know. What do you want to do?" I turned back to the laptop screen. The 3 steps were still there. I read them again before answering. "I have a conference next week," I said. "In Ohio." "You're kidding." No, Northbridge had been invited to speak at a regional community development fundraiser in a small town outside Columbus. I almost said no when Marian asked me to go. Then I saw the town name on the email. MILLBROOK. The same town I left 7 years earlier. "You still going?" Lena asked. "Yes." "You sure that's a good idea?" "It's work," I said. "I'm not changing my schedule because my family suddenly remembered I exist." She laughed softly. "That sounds like you." After we hung up, I went back to the laptop and added another line. Step 4, keep the plan. Do not react. The next morning there was an email in my work inbox. Not my personal account. My work account. From my mother. Subject line, your mother. After everything this family has done for you, you can't even return a phone call. I read the whole message once. Then again, slower. She wrote that she had spent years defending me, that people had asked where I was, that she told them I was getting help. She said I owed the family a conversation. I saved the email. Didn't reply. An hour later, a message came through LinkedIn from my sister. I see you're doing well for yourself. Congratulations. I need a cosigner for a loan. It's temporary. Family helps family. I took a screenshot. Saved that too. That afternoon, my brother posted something online and tagged half the relatives back home. Funny how some people forget where they came from when they get a fancy job. More screenshots. Not for court. Not for revenge. For myself. Because I know how memory works when you grow up in a house where every argument ends with someone saying that never happened. That evening, my phone buzzed again. A text from my aunt. Your mother knows you're speaking at the fundraiser next week. They're all planning to be there. I read the message twice. Then I set the phone down, went to the sink, and washed the same plate 3 times before I realized I was done. 7 years ago, I walked out of that town with 1 suitcase. Next week, I was walking back in through the front door. Not as a daughter. Not as a problem. As the keynote speaker. And for the first time since the voicemails started, I felt completely calm. I flew into Columbus on a Friday afternoon. The airport looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was just used to bigger ones now. I picked up a rental car, set the GPS, and started the drive south toward MILLBROOK. Flat fields. Gray sky. The same long stretches of road I used to take without thinking about where they led. The closer I got, the quieter my thoughts became. Not nervous. Not excited. Just steady. I checked into a small hotel outside town and went over my notes for the fundraiser speech one more time. It was the same presentation I'd given before. Community development, funding structures, small town revitalization. Nothing personal. Nothing about family. Work. That was the rule I kept in my head the whole time. Step 1, do the job. Step 2, keep it professional. Step 3, do not react. The fundraiser was held at the MILLBROOK Community Center, the same building where my high school graduation ceremony had been. White tablecloths, round tables, a banner across the wall that read, "Building Tomorrow Together." About 200 people were already inside when I arrived through the side entrance reserved for speakers. I signed in at the registration table, and the volunteer handed me a badge. Carla Bennett, Operations Director, Northbridge Community Services keynote speaker. She smiled politely, like she didn't recognize the name. Maybe she didn't. Or maybe she did and didn't want to show it. Through the doorway, I could see the main hall. Teachers, shop owners, church members, people I hadn't seen in 7 years. And at the center table, wearing a navy dress and talking to guests like she owned the room, my mother. My father sat beside her, hands folded in his lap. My sister was laughing at something someone said. My brother stood near the buffet, scrolling his phone. They were less than 20 feet away. None of them knew I was there yet. Pastor Reynolds, the organizer, met me near the stage. "Carla, we're really glad you could make the trip," he said, shaking my hand. "Happy to be here. You grew up around here, right?" "Yes." "Well, people are excited to hear from someone who made it out and came back to help." I nodded once. He didn't know how true that was. At 7:15, he stepped to the microphone. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight." The room quieted. Silverware stopped moving. Chairs scraped as people turned toward the stage. "Our keynote speaker tonight started her career in a small office answering phones," he continued, "and now serves as Operations Director at Northbridge Community Services, helping communities across the Northwest secure funding and build new programs." Light applause. She grew up right here in MILLBROOK, Ohio. That got a little more attention. I stood behind the curtain, holding my notes, waiting for my name. "Please give a warm welcome to Carla Bennett." I walked out onto the stage. For a second, the lights made it hard to see the audience. Then my eyes adjusted. My mother was still smiling, until she realized who was standing at the podium. Her expression didn't change all at once. First the smile stopped. Then her mouth opened slightly. Then her hands gripped the edge of the table like she needed something to hold onto. My father froze. My sister leaned forward like she wasn't sure she was seeing right. My brother stopped chewing and just stared. Around them, the rest of the room stood up. Applause. People clapping, some louder than others, a few whispering to each other as they looked from the stage to my mother's table and back again. I waited until the room settled before I spoke. "Thank you," I said. My voice sounded exactly the way it always did when I gave presentations. Steady. Professional. It's good to be back in a small town again. A few people laughed softly. I gave the speech the same way I always did. Funding programs. Grant structures. Community partnerships. Numbers. Examples. Results. No stories about my family. No explanations. Near the end, I paused for a moment and looked out across the room. "I grew up in a place a lot like this," I said. A few heads turned toward my mother's table. "I left when I was young," I continued. "Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to figure out who I was without everyone else deciding for me." The room stayed quiet. I didn't raise my voice. "I learned something working in community programs," I said. "People do their best when they're seen for who they actually are, not who someone else says they are." I let the sentence sit there. No names. No accusations. Just the words. When I finished, the applause lasted longer than the first time. Some people stood again. My mother didn't. She stayed in her chair, hands folded tight in her lap, staring straight ahead. After the speech, people crowded around the stage. Handshakes. Questions. Small talk. I answered politely, the same way I would at any event. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother moving through the crowd. She stopped in front of me with a smile that looked carefully put together. "Carla," she said, opening her arms slightly. What a surprise. I didn't step forward. "You had my number," I said. Her smile flickered. "We've been trying to reach you." I heard the messages. My sister moved closer. "We need to talk," she said quietly. I listened to 43 voicemails, I replied. Not one of them sounded like a conversation. My father stood behind them, looking at the floor. "Let's not do this here," he said. "You had 7 years to do it somewhere else," I said. My brother crossed his arms. "You think you're better than us now?" I shook my head once. "No. I think I'm done being who you needed me to be." No one spoke for a moment. People nearby pretended not to listen, but nobody moved. I straightened my jacket, picked up my folder, and nodded once toward the organizer. "I have to head out," I said. Then I walked toward the exit without looking back. Outside, the air was cold and quiet. I sat in the rental car with my hands on the steering wheel and didn't start the engine right away. Through the windows of the building, I could see people standing in small groups, talking. By morning, everyone in Millbrook would know a different version of the story. For the first time in 7 years. It wouldn't be the one my mother told. I drove back to the hotel that night without turning the radio on. The roads around Millbrook look the same after dark as they do during the day. Flat fields. Long stretches of nothing. A few porch lights in the distance. I wasn't replaying the speech in my head. I was thinking about the voicemails. 43 messages in one night after 7 years of silence. Not one of them asking how I was. All of them asking for something. When I got back to the room, I opened my laptop and started writing an email. Not fast. One sentence at a time. I addressed it to my mother, my father, my sister, and my brother. No greetings. Just the message. I'm writing this once so there isn't any confusion. I'm not co-signing a loan. I'm not sending money. I'm not investing in anyone's business. I stopped for a moment, then kept going. If any of you want a relationship with me, it can't start with a request. It has to start with an honest conversation about what happened before I left. The fund. The stories told about me. The last 7 years. I read that part twice before finishing. Until that happens, my answer is no. I wish you all well, but I'm not going back to the way things were. I didn't edit it again. I pressed send, closed the laptop, and turned off the light. No music. No tears. Just the sound of the heater clicking on and off while I lay there staring at the ceiling. The next morning, I drove back to Columbus and flew home to Spokane. For a few days, nothing happened. No calls. No messages. Then a letter arrived at the office. Not email. Actual paper. My father's handwriting on the envelope. I sat at my desk for a minute before opening it. He didn't write much. Carla, I don't know if I have the right to say this, but I'm sorry. Not for your mother. For me. For every time I sat there and said nothing when I should have said something. I told myself I was keeping the peace. Really, I was keeping things comfortable for myself. You deserved better from me. That was all. No excuses. No requests. Just the words. I folded the letter and put it in the top drawer of my desk. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't believe him. Because I didn't know yet what a reply would mean. About a week later, my aunt called. I almost didn't answer, but her name was the only one from Ohio that didn't make my chest tighten. "How are you?" she asked. "I'm fine." There was a long pause. "You shook that town up," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to." "Yes, you did," she said. "And maybe it needed shaking." She told me what happened after the fundraiser. People started asking questions. At church. At the grocery store. At the post office. They asked my mother why she told everyone I was getting help somewhere. They asked why nobody knew I was working out of state. They asked why the story never sounded the same twice. Small towns don't forget things. They just wait until the story changes. My mother stepped down from the fundraiser committee the next week. Officially, she said she needed a break. Unofficially, people didn't want her speaking for the town anymore. My sister never got the loan. Without a cosigner, the bank wouldn't approve it. She moved back into my parents' house for a while. My brother deleted his post online after someone sent him a screenshot of my company website. My aunt said the part that surprised her most was my father. He started correcting people when they repeated the old story. "She's working," he told them. "She's doing fine." It was the first time he had ever said that out loud. I listened without interrupting. Not because I didn't care. Because I didn't need to say anything. When the call ended, I went back to work. Answered emails. Reviewed budgets. Sat in a meeting about a housing grant. Normal things. That night I stopped at the store, bought groceries, and went home. The apartment looked exactly the same as it had the week before. Same table. Same couch. Same stack of mail by the door. Nothing dramatic had changed. But something felt lighter. Not like I had won anything. More like I had finally put something down that I didn't realize I was still carrying. Life went back to normal faster than I expected. Not the old normal. The one I built after I left. Most mornings start the same way now. I wake up before my alarm, make coffee, and stand by the kitchen window while the city is still quiet. In Spokane, the mornings always feel a little gray, even in the summer. I like that. Nothing loud. Nothing rushed. Just enough time to think before the day starts. The week after the fundraiser, I put my phone on the table one night and scrolled through the call log again. 43 voicemails still sitting there. I didn't delete them. Not because I plan to listen to them again. Because they remind me how quickly people remember you when they need something. And how quiet things can stay when they don't. My father's letter is still in the top drawer of my desk at work. Every once in a while, I take it out and read it again. The words haven't changed. Neither has my answer. I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not going back to the way things were either. Some things don't get fixed with one apology. They get fixed slowly, if they get fixed at all. A few months after the trip, I finally opened the wooden box my grandmother left me. I had carried it from Ohio to Washington without ever looking inside. It sat on my nightstand for years, like something I wasn't ready to deal with. One Sunday afternoon, I made tea, sat on the floor by the bed, and opened it. Inside were the same things I remembered. A strand of pearls she used to wear to church. An old photograph of me when I was about 6, missing my front teeth and smiling like I didn't know anything about the world yet. And a folded letter. I had read it once years ago, but I read it again that afternoon, slower this time. She wrote that I didn't owe anyone my life just because we shared the same last name. She wrote that sometimes leaving is the only way to stay yourself. I put the letter back in the box and closed the lid. Not because I was upset. Because I understood it now in a way I didn't when I was younger. That night, I had a few people over for dinner. Nothing special. Lena came. 2 people from the office. My neighbor from downstairs who always brings too much bread. We sat around the table I bought at a thrift store when I first moved here. The chairs don't match. The plates don't match either. Someone spilled sauce. Someone told the same story twice. Nobody cared. At one point I stood in the kitchen rinsing dishes and just listened to everyone talking in the other room. No tension. No pretending. No feeling like I needed to explain myself. Just noise. Normal noise. And I realized something I hadn't noticed before. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for the room to turn on me. A few weeks ago, a girl from work asked if she could talk to me after a meeting. She said she was thinking about cutting contact with her family, but didn't know if she was overreacting. We sat in the conference room for almost an hour. I didn't tell her what to do. I just told her what I learned. Silence isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's the only way to hear yourself think. She nodded like that made sense. Most people know when something isn't right. They just need someone to say it out loud. If you stayed with me through this story, I appreciate that. Stories like this aren't really about family arguments or money or small towns. They're about what happens when you finally stop trying to be the person everyone else decided you were. If you want to hear more stories like this, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more people find these stories, and it keeps this community growing. I'm always curious where people are listening from, so leave a comment with your city and what time it is there right now. 2 more stories will be on the screen next, and one of them starts with a phone call that almost got ignored until the 3rd ring.